In 1989, director Masato Harada brought us Gunhed. Now, this was a live-action Japanese mecha robot film that was originally conceived to be a Godzilla film. However, that was rejected, but the script reworked to be its own entity and ended up being kind of a mecha robo war movie to a point, released in 1989, and was the first live-action Japanese movie to be imported by the UK company Manga, who is releasing kind of anime really for the first time into to the kind of the populace here in the UK. This was their first live-action film. Now, the story is a little contrived, to be quite honest. We learn from a hell of a lot of exposition dump at the beginning of the movie that this takes place, obviously, at some point in the future. Obviously, bear in mind this was made in '89. And there was like a Terminator-esque style war where the kind of the AI has clashed with humans, and there was a kind of a large sort of central computer, if you like, which was located on this island, and it kind of became self-aware, and then we had this great robot war, and this island has been kind of like was the epicenter ultimately of this this conflict. Cut to, I think, 10 years later, and kind of now is a world where technology is the kind of the currency of choice, and the movie focuses on a group of scavengers that want to essentially go into this island in hope of recovering computer chips to use as currency. While they're there, they discover that there's actually another human, another kind of soldier there for a different reason, and even a child who may well have been the offspring of some of the custodians that were in the island originally. However, this island may not be quite as inactive as they first thought. What will happen? Well, you have to watch the movie to find out. At least you'll have to attempt to watch it, because this is one difficult movie to follow. But let's talk about what works first of all. This is kind of a cyberpunk aesthetic, and as such, you know, does have some quite fun and interesting kind of designs in regards to the costuming. I mean, it's kind of of its time. I think it's like the cyberpunk craze was really left in the 80s, to be honest. I know we've seen a couple of resurgence here and there. I don't know, it just seems dated, to be honest. But nonetheless, there are some quite fun designs here, and who doesn't like kind of giant mechas that do look very kind of you know, impressive. And we do have some kind of Godzilla style action, obviously giant kind of mechs and stuff made to look like they're huge and towering, obviously, over the kind of the humans, although there's less of that than you would think. The story is quite difficult to follow, but there are a couple of kind of fun action sequences within there. I think our central protagonist Brooklyn is quite a likeable kind of character. But I got to be honest with you, this film is quite poor. It actually feels like it's the sequel of what would have been a better film, because we see in the kind of the intro essentially catching you up to what has happened in this world where this great robot war happens. And to be honest, I want to see that, not this kind of less interesting aftermath of what had happened, because the little clips that we see of this great robot war, which isn't, you know, it isn't a previous movie, this never actually was a sequel to anything, it's just kind of setting up its own mythology. But what it set up looks far more interesting than the actual film that we've got. We see a glimpse of the kind of the robot fights and stuff like that in the beginning, and the kind of the humans versus the machines sort of thing. However, the actual film that we get is such a confusing plot, because it just seems to lurch from one kind of scene to another without a real clear narrative, and is extremely kind of hard to follow, with just kind of like lines of dialogue that are kind of meant to string kind of scenes together, and it's just poorly made. The bulk of the movie is just a guy running around in an industrial complex at the end of the day, with a few kind of like, you know, laser effects added on in kind of post and stuff like that. It isn't particularly, it's such a dull film to look at. It's really sort of dark, and you know, it's hard to kind of really see. There's not much kind of pop in it, if that makes sense, in a visual style. The acting is awful, if I'm honest, and it's just has a lack of real substance to it. You know, like I've said, I think you kind of wanted to see, you know, giant mechs kind of fight the robot war, and You'll get a smidgen of that, but not as much as you're going to be expecting with a movie called Gunhed and kind of like the images that you see at the beginning of the film. The editing is atrocious. It's some of the worst editing I've ever seen, to be honest. It makes me think that maybe the cut that we got here in the West may well be different, but I've tried to have a look to see if that was the case, and I could find no evidence to suggest that that was the case, but it just seems like it's been slashed to pieces and kind of like just poorly edited. But like I've said, I don't think this was a shorter cut from a longer film that would have maybe a bit more sensical. It's just poorly edited. Ultimately, the story just drags in places. Despite the fact that it being very convoluted and contrived, there are long periods where you feel like all you're doing is watching someone kind of like run around a factory or kind of fiddle around with some kind of mechanical bits here and there. There's so little payoff in this film. This was quite disappointing. I remember because I bought this when it came out on VHS, thinking, oh, that's like a cool mecha warrior, sort of mech robot kind of film. And I was so disappointed then. Rewatching it now is, you know, it just reminded me of how much I disliked it in the first time. This was quite a poor film. I have seen some defenders for it. I think you've got to be objective in these things. I cannot see how anyone would say this would be a legitimately good film, but each to their own, I suppose. This one was a hard watch, a hard rewatch. I'll give it a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.